Now that our great U.S. military has eliminated Iran's capabilities to build a nuclear weapon, at least for the near term, the next question is, what will Iran do to retaliate? And there are grave concerns that they might be able to attack us right here in the homeland within the contiguous 48 because they could very well be living in our neighborhoods thanks to President Biden's open border policy. How bad is it? Well, let's take a look at this report from Fox News.
All right, welcome back. Want to reset, talk about where we are now and where we might be going next when it comes to Operation Midnight Hammer and the situation in Iran. So taking a look once again to recap what we did over the weekend. The U.S. attacking 3 separate Iranian nuclear sites. Isfahan, where they got a bunch of underground tunnels with enriched uranium. Natanz, and then the big one at Fordo. That is where we used 12 different bunker busters, waiting for damage assessments from those. But the question is, what, if any, responses are going to be from the Iranians next? Keep in mind, we've got about 40,000 U.S. military personnel sprinkled throughout bases all within the Middle East, going from Turkey all the way down to Qatar and the UAE. Remember, back in 2020, it was Al Assad Air Base in Iraq, where the Iranians decided to shoot ballistic missiles in response to the strike against Soleimani. Then down here in Qatar, we've got Al Udeid Air Base. That is our biggest base in all of the Middle East. That's where CENTCOM also has some of their headquarters. The question also, what's going to happen here on U.S. soil? The potential threat of Iranian sleeper cells. We talked about the open border the last 4 years. Take a look at this data. CBP sources telling Fox News from 2021 to 2024 under the Biden administration, just over 1,500 Iranians were caught by Border Patrol crossing the southern border illegally. Of that, almost half of them, 729, were released into the U.S. That is 48%. That also does not account for the more than 2 million known gotaways who slipped across the southern border during that time.
I hope you soberly looked at those numbers because it's remarkable. 1,500 that they know of crossed the border during the Biden administration, and they released half of them. Because it makes perfect sense that Iranians would be crossing our Mexican border to come into the country. And why not just let them stay here, right? I mean, what kind of damage could they do? Also, as Maluzhin just said, Bill Maluzhin of Fox News, there were at least 2 million, is estimated, they crossed our border without us actually knowing who they are or where they came from. The odds are that a good percentage of those 2 million also came from Iran. Let's face it, if you're a terrorist and you've been trained to be part of a sleeper cell here in America and put together a terror plot against Americans here in our homeland, and you're crossing our southern border illegally, you're probably going to great pains not to be detected, not to be discovered. I mean, so I'm worried about the 700 plus who have been released into the country by the negligent Biden administration, but I'm just as worried, if not more, about the ones we don't know about. Caroline Levitt raised that issue on ABC News yesterday.
The American people continue to be safe under this president and this administration that has done more to secure our homeland than any administration in history. The previous administration allowed 20 million illegal aliens into our country. This administration is focused on the largest mass deportation of those illegal criminals, many of them who do come from countries in the Middle East. Many of those were known terrorists, and this administration is detaining and deporting them every day to protect our homeland and protect the American public. That is always the president's number one priority and goal. And just to be clear, yes, this strike on Saturday did make our homeland safer because it took away Iran's ability to create a nuclear bomb. This is a regime that threatens death to America and death to Israel, and they no longer have the capability to build this nuclear weapon and threaten the world. So not just the United States, it's a safer place, but also the entire globe.
Yeah. And again, we need to keep this in mind that the last administration let over 20 million people into this country illegally, and we have no idea who they are, where they are, or where they came from. And I know people will be like, oh, well, they're just refugees from Iran, right? They're just seeking asylum here. And that could be. They're poor. They're desperate. They're just looking for a better life. How the hell did they afford flying from Iran to Mexico? Or wherever it is they flew to before they made their way to our southern border? You ever ask yourself that? I mean, how poor and destitute and needing a better life economically would they be if they were able to afford that trip? And why America? I mean, Europe is closer, isn't it? You should be able to travel shorter distances and still set yourself up for asylum somewhere in Western Europe instead. But they had to come to America. They had to come to Mexico and cross illegally across our southern border. That should give everybody pause. And if you're concerned about it, I hope you blame the right people. That would be your last president. Her board and his border czar, Kamala Harris. Tom Homan is our new border czar, and he raised this specifically yesterday with Maria on Fox News.
Can you assess that issue particularly? How many Iranians are in the country that are in sleeper cells trying to do bad to America right now?
Well, look, you and I have talked about this many times. I said the last 4 years, my biggest concern was this open border was the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen. So I pulled numbers this morning just from a CBP under Joe Biden. There was 1,272 nationals of Iran released in the country between OFO and the Border Patrol. And you compare that to the Trump administration, zero. Right, zero releases. And right now, because of President Trump's leadership, we have the most secure border in my lifetime, most secure border in the history of this nation. So we have a secure border. That was President Trump's big win on securing this nation. So we're not releasing people in this country, especially interest aliens aren't crossing that border undetected. But under Joe Biden, we had over 10 million people cross that border. But my biggest concern from day one, beyond the fentanyl, beyond the sex trafficking women and children, were the 2 million known gotaways. Over 2 million people crossed that border. We don't know who they are, where they came from, because they got away, because Border Patrol is so overwhelmed with the humanitarian crisis that Biden created that over 2 million people crossed the border and got away. That is my biggest concern, and that's what created the biggest national security vulnerability this country's ever seen.
Listen, if that's Tom Homan's biggest concern, and that's my biggest concern, it should be your biggest concern too. As everybody starts to freak out now that there may be some retaliation from Iran, sadly, it appears that if there is a retaliation, it might be in our own backyard, at our own local mall or movie theater or other soft target. That's the bigger concern. And of course, you've got your Biden administration to blame for that. Hopefully, our Homeland Security will be able to get on top of it ahead of time. But what's really remarkable is that the people who are wringing their hands and screaming, you know, we should have never done this to Iran because now there's going to be a terror attack against Americans. Well, if Iran is capable of a terror attack against Americans, which clearly they are because they've been doing it for, 50 years, then that's just another reason why they should never get a nuclear weapon. And I don't see anybody coming up with a real solution as to how you keep them from getting a nuclear weapon other than doing exactly what was just done. But the concern is real. So what are the details here? Bill Maloogian, once again, who covers the beat of the border and Homeland Security and immigration better than anyone in the corporate media. He's at Fox News. He got the breakdown from CBP. Let's take a look at it together because he shared it on social media. So his CBP source says there were 1,504 Iranian nationals that were caught crossing the border illegally. That's during the Biden administration from fiscal year 21 through 24. Now, 729 of them were released into the United States. And I want to be clear. Those could be Iranians who were being persecuted by the Iranian government, who yearned for freedom over all of these decades, who were being persecuted for religious purposes or political purposes. They may be at odds with the Ayatollahs. They may be at odds with the regime over there. And they did come here seeking asylum. Again, that could be the case. I don't know. I know that the Iranian people, many of the people in Iran hate their government, hate their regime. Many of them still remember 47 years ago when their society was very, very different. So that could be the case here. That's also not the gravest concern. Here's the year-by-year breakdown of the Iranian nationals that were caught by Border Patrol. In fiscal year 21, 48 were caught, 22, 197. But look what happens when word gets out. Hey, guys, they're not stopping anyone at the southern border. You go to fiscal year 23, it jumps more than double to 462. And then in fiscal year 24, which, by the way, toward the end of it, Biden pretended like he cared because he and eventually his vice president was running for office. but it almost doubled in fiscal year 24 as well, up to 797 who were stopped. Now, the year-by-year breakdown of the Iranians who were released, again, look at the exponential growth here. 12 in fiscal year 21, 40 in 22, 229 in 23, 448 in 24. Here's some more information. According, again, Malusian's source in Border Patrol. It's unclear how many of these Iranians were on the terror watch list. Wait a minute. Sorry. It's unclear how many were on the terror watch list. I would think if one of them were on the terror watch list, they wouldn't be released. Right? It's unclear how many of these Iranians were on the terror watch list, as the Biden administration repeatedly denied my FOIA requests and appeals for the data, citing the privacy concerns of the people on the list and minimal public interest in disclosing the data. Yeah, there's no public interest in disclosing how many people on the terror watch list from Iran were just released to roam free in America. Where's the public interest in that? There's no public interest in the American people being informed about what a lousy President Joe Biden was and how treasonous he was in his open border policy, allowing our enemies to walk among us. Now, no public interest in that. Privacy concerns. If you're on the terror watch list, we're very concerned about your privacy. You should be able to download as much internet porn as possible. There were over 2 million known recorded gotaways at the border during the Biden administration. So 2 million people got away that they know about. In other words, they saw them, they couldn't catch them, they got overwhelmed, they just plowed through, or maybe they evaded them, but at least they, then they noted, okay, there were 8 people in that van and they got away from us. The 2 million gotaways are people that they know about. They have no idea how many people surreptitiously crossed the border, made their way into the country, and just disappeared into the ether. The gotaways, by the way, also include, I believe, overstays of student visas or tourist visas, although I don't know how many people get a tourist visa from Tehran to come into the United States of America. 2 million known recorded gotaways at the border during the Biden administration. Because they were never caught, there's no way of knowing where they're from. All Iranians are special interest aliens due to national security concerns, and they're supposed to receive enhanced vetting by DHS. Almost half of the Iranians encountered by the Border Patrol were released into the United States, as we mentioned, but that's the breakdown on the details there by Bill Malusian. You'll remember in September of last year, just about 2 months before the presidential election, J.D. Vance, running at the time as the Ohio senator and the vice presidential candidate with Donald Trump, he appeared on the All In podcast and specifically spoke about this concern.
There's a lot of videos. Elon's gone down there. Bobby Kennedy's gone down there. You've gone down there.
Sure.
And the interdictions are not necessarily coming from countries in Central and South America anymore. They're coming from places in, near Asia, and a lot of places that you wouldn't normally think people coming from, Middle East, etc. From a national security perspective, what do we think is happening?
Yeah.
Why is that happening?
Yeah. So, part of the reason it's happening is
it's not Hondurans necessarily.
Right. No, that's right. No,
Iranians.
It's Iranians.
Yeah.
It's people from all over Asia, Africa, Europe. I mean, look, if you look at this, that is the open door, right? So if you want to come to this country, that is the open door, and God knows why some of them want to be here. I mean, given what's going on in the Middle East, I do worry about military-age males from Iran coming into this country through the American southern border. But I actually asked a Border Patrol agent about this on one of my visits, and great guy, was actually kind of heartbroken because he signed up to protect his country, and he's a relatively recent immigrant. I could tell that by his accent. This guy's like very nervous and very heartbroken about the fact that he can't do his job. And he told me this story, and I feel like an idiot in hindsight, because he's like, we have a guy who came in here. Well, I asked the guy, like, why do you think this guy's Iranian? And he said, well, because he came through and he said that he was Mexican. And I was like, well, couldn't he have been Mexican? And he said, well, he didn't speak Spanish. It's like, oh, that's a tell.
Yeah,
guy comes from Mexico, legal alien, doesn't speak Spanish. That's probably a pretty significant tell. But it's happening because this is what Kamala Harris has done. She's created this massive gap in our national security, and people are taking advantage of it.
There you go. And that's where we are. That's where we are. So whenever anybody sits in front of you and tells you one way or the other what the threat is and whether there's a possibility for a domestic terror attack, and whether there are sleeper cells, and whether the people in the country, the bottom line is whether they work for the Department of Homeland Security, whether they work for the White House, whether they work for the media, whether they work on Capitol Hill or wherever, or law enforcement. The only honest question is they don't know. They really don't know, because of the chaos that we had, the controlled, planned, coordinated, and celebrated chaos of our southern border. We literally do not know how many people are in this country from Iran who are affiliated with Iran. We know that they got a whole lot of money from the Biden administration and from the Obama administration. We know that for decades they've been planning terror attacks all through the world. We know that they've got affiliations with Hezbollah and with the Houthis and with Hamas. They had affiliations with Cuba and Venezuela in our hemisphere. We know all of those things. And, you know, these are the reasons why a nation secures its border. This is a reason why a nation makes it a priority to regulate how many people can come into their country, how they come into your country, how they're documented coming into your country, and tracking them. And by the way, even more importantly, turning a ton of people away, saying, no, you cannot come into our country. That's why countries have borders. And that's why countries have border policies. And for the last 4 years, our border policy was open the doors wide and figure out how to get as many people in here as quickly as possible. Because the policy had nothing to do with our nation's security. It had to do with politics. It's one of the reasons why this president won his election, and now he's cleaning up the mess. And you may argue that we should have never engaged in this military strike because the ramification, the repercussion, the retaliation may be a domestic terror attack. And God forbid, I hope you're wrong. But it could happen. The only thing I can tell you is that's part of the conversation immediately following this strike in the media by very smart people. And that tells me that the people who are in charge of keeping us safe, they're fully aware of it too. And they're going to do whatever they can.